Hello HDExaminers, this is Jeff Morrow with Sierra Analytics, and I'm here today to talk about the new features in HDExaminer 2.4. So let's dive right in. The first thing I want to show you is that here under the File menu, in addition to New, where you can import a FASTA file, there's now New from Uniprot, where you can actually just give it a Uniprot ID code, such as this one for our old favorite bovine serum albumin, and it will actually go to the Uniprot website and grab the sequence. So another thing you might have noticed when I was doing that, there's also this Save Downloaded FASTA File Locally button. And if you check that, then in addition to importing the sequence into HDExaminer, it will also prompt you to save this sequence to a FASTA file somewhere on your hard drive. Next up is a new feature here in the Edit Protein State window. This is where you normally go to add modifications to your protein. And normally when you add a modification, you can pick from a list or you can enter a generic formula. So suppose I have a new generic formula that isn't on the list. Now when I enter it, it will ask me if I want to save it for future use. So if I say yes, then I can give it a name. In this case, it's a adenylation, which I have no idea if I'm pronouncing right, and so for all you biologists out there, I apologize if I'm botching the pronunciation. But now if I give it a name and a formula, now if I go to a later residue, so I want to put that same one on residue 8, it's now in my pop-up menu here, and you can add it that way. In addition, you can also now go to Tools Options, and here under Modifications, it has the entire list that you can add or remove items from. And this is the list that will appear every time you bring up this pop-up menu. The next feature I want to show you is the new automation features that are present in HDExaminer. These are features that allow you to create a new HDExaminer project from scratch in a way that quickly takes you straight to loading and starting to calculate all the files. So some of you may have seen in the previous version that there is now a file format for automation. So this HDA format here is described in the user's manual for the document in the program. So check that out. If you take one of these automation files and you drag it onto HDExaminer, it loads up all the protein states that you specified in that file. It loads up all of the peptide sources that you specify. It loads up all the MS data, and it even just starts right in calculating. There have been a few additions to this file format, so go ahead and check it out in the user's manual. Okay, now let's move on to the peptides view and see what's new there. So one of the big new things is if you select one of these peptide pool views like the butterfly plot or the volcano plot, these are now fully zoomable. If you drag a rectangle, it will zoom to that area. And if you click, it will unzoom. You can nested zoom, so you can zoom way into these points and you can zoom back out. Some of these plots have a behavior that if you click on something, like in this case, you click on that point and it brings you to that peptide. That behavior all still works even if you're zoomed. So if you click on this point, it takes you to that peptide. If you zoom in and you click not on a point, it unzooms. And that's the same with the volcano plot as well. You can zoom in, you can look at these, you can go like that and zoom way into something. And again, if you click on a point, it will take you to that peptide. But if you have a zoomed plot and you click not on a point, it zooms you back out. So I'd also like to mention a few features here in the analysis view. The first is that we've done a little bit of speed improvement, especially on Waters data and Brooker data. So if you're using those kinds of data, give the new version a try and see if it's better for your results. The next thing I want to talk about is here in the Add Experiment window, there's a new field here, percentage D2O. So this is for those situations where you have a D2O buffer percentage that is less than 100%. By putting that number in here when you import the MS file for the experiment, HDExaminer will now do all the scaling math for you. So for example, if you put 50% in here and you load up your data And for this experiment, a certain peptide sees 30% deuteration. Well, it will treat that as 60% because it takes all of your deuteration results and it divides it by this percentage. So 30 would go to 60 in this case. So if you're using a deuteration percentage in your buffer other than 100%, this is where to put that, and HDExaminer will do the math for you. Those of you who work with top-down or middle-down ETD or ECD data may have noticed the phenomenon where sometimes you can get M+1 or M-1 ions in your sample, which leads to isotope clusters that look kind of wonky like this. If HDExaminer is reading ETD data, it knows that it should allow for these kinds of strange clusters based on the possibility of M-1 or M+1 ions. Next, I want to talk about a few new features here under Tools Options. The first thing you might notice is that there are now these two buttons in the bottom left. These allow you to export and import all of your settings. This is useful if you have a multi-computer situation where you want to make sure that every instance of HDExaminer is running the same settings. It's also useful for debugging, so if you have a support request, I might ask you to export your options here and send them to me. So that's what these do. Another new feature is right here in the protein view settings. It's this checkbox that says difference heat map treats statistically insignificant differences as 0. So what that means is if you're doing a comparison heat map, so say bound and unbound together, what that setting does is anytime you have a statistically insignificant difference, then it doesn't actually show you that small difference in the heat map. It just treats that difference as 0. So that changes things ever so slightly here. For example, it just got rid of that little bit of pink that was in this region because that difference was not significant. So what is significant? Well, that's what this next pop-up menu does. So there are 3 different significance criteria you can use. One is the uptake plot confidence intervals, which is these things right here, which I'm not currently drawing. There they are. So it's these confidence intervals. It can also be the residual plot significance line, which is this faint gray line here in your residual plot, which is calculated either automatically or given your setting based on what your settings under peptide plot are. Or the third significance criterion is the volcano plot, which is those 2 dashed red lines that you see in the volcano plot. So whichever one you have set here, that's the significance criterion it will use when generating a heat map, a difference heat map. It will leave out anything that is not significant based on the significance criterion that you set. Another new option is here under heat map colors. So you've probably seen that this is where you can set the colors that are used in the heat map, but now there's also this new checkbox called Use Continuous Color Gradient. And what that means, if you have it checked, is that now instead of just using exactly these colors that are over here in the key, it will actually interpolate between those colors for example, numbers in between 70 and 80. It will interpolate between these, between 80 and 90, it will interpolate between these. And so you see this slightly more varied color palette here to show you smaller differences in the heat map. Finally, we have another new option here under retention time that's called strict mode. Both ends of retention time window must be within specified range. Well, okay, so what does that mean? Well, here it's best to use an image to graphically illustrate this. By default, HDExaminer will take your deuterated retention time setting. So in this case, it needs to be within half a minute of your non-deuterated retention time range. What that means is that the deuterated range can be up to half a minute away from either end of the non-deuterated retention time window. So this image illustrates what is allowed in this case. With strict mode set, Each endpoint of the deuterated retention time window has to be within that distance of the corresponding endpoint of the undeuerated window. So, with strict mode on, the deuterated start retention time has to be within half a minute of the non-deuterated start time, and the deuterated end time must be within half a minute of the undeuerated end time. So that lets you have a little more control over the retention time windows that HDExaminer decides to use. There is a corresponding strict mode setting under ion mobility. This works exactly the same way, except it's for your ion mobility drift time rather than the retention time. So to summarize the new features, we have the ability to import a uniprot sequence when creating a new file. We have the ability to edit the modifications that appear in the pop-up menu, and in addition to edit that list even on the fly when you create a new modification in your project. We have new automation capabilities. Check out the manual for those. All peptide plots are now zoomable. We have some speed improvements, especially for Waters and Brooker data. We have the ability to set up a deuteration buffer percentage, and if you do that, HDExaminer will automatically scale all of your results in that experiment. We have better handling of M-1 and M+1 peaks in ETD and ECD data. We have the ability to import and export program options. We have the ability to leave out statistically insignificant differences when generating a difference heat map. We have the smooth color gradient setting in the heat map. And finally, we have strict mode when dealing with retention time or ion mobility drift time ranges. So this is most of what's new in 2.4. There's also a bunch of, bug fixes and other small improvements. If you're currently under a support contract, we encourage you to upgrade to version 2.4 right away if you haven't already done so. If you're not under a support contract and you'd like to try the new version or upgrade, please contact us at hdx@leaptech.com. Once again, this is Jeff Morrow from Sierra Analytics. Thanks for watching.